Say hello to you, my friend. How are you? Say hello to you, my friend. How are you? Been a while since we've come together like this. We ought to do it more often. In Adelaide, there was a Lutheran guy called Alfred Zimbauer, Pastor Alfred Zimbauer, who, with his wife Helga, took people who came from displaced persons camps in Germany into a big house that they had established out at College Park. And I know the history goes that at one stage Helga's bathroom was shared by 27 people. And they did that with minimal funding, with no government funding initially. And that was the kind of care that happened because they cared about refugees, they cared about displaced persons with no government funding, so they just did what they did. And they did it however they could do it. And, you know, it worked, but it was also very, very challenging. And of course, William and Catherine Booth started a movement which far be it for me to talk about. Most of you guys know about it. Started a movement that began to care for homeless people, and through similar self-sacrifice, they started a movement that spread all over the world and came to Australia in 1880, and that's partly why we're here today in this building. Now, all that happened without government funding. In the past several decades, the landscape's changed, and as Russ will probably talk about 70 years ago, government began to take over the role of the church and took responsibility for social welfare. And this is what's happened. This is the Australian government. You may have seen this, but this is the projection of what we're going to be spending on welfare in our lifetime. That's a $4.8 trillion blowout. And when you consider what happened in the past, you could see that the kind of work that the church was doing was probably saving the government almost that level of funding. And the reality is that the governments can't do it alone. They are really struggling with this issue. What is going to happen? It's constantly out there in the conversation. So, governments can't do it alone, and faith-based organisations can't do it alone. We need to work together. The latest government strategic policy in response to childhood vulnerability is being called place-based collective impact. This is a paper that just came out recently. And it's a great summary of the kind of principles that we found have worked really well in communities for children, of working collectively and doing partnerships and working together. But the conclusion of it is this. It says it is reliant on a substantial shift in the distribution of power away from governments and service providers to cross-sector collective partnerships with substantial community membership and devolved authority. So it involves distributing power from those in control to others who may not be so much the normal people who have access to that kind of power. What this paper doesn't say is how that happens. What motivates people to shift power and have the kind of compassion that enables them to give up power and release it to other people? Organisations to do that, to work collaboratively with other people. And it doesn't talk about the power to find the kind of practitioners who can devolve authority and give agency to children and families they serve, the children and families they serve. Where does that come from? And that's the constant question. Where does the motivation to have this kind of care and compassion come from? And that's something that we need to be thinking about today. And we'll go on a journey and we'll learn about that.
My name's Russell Rook, and firstly, a big thank you to everyone for allowing me to be here, to David and to Carl and to everyone who's put effort into organising this. It would have been a lonely 8 days in Australia, having turned up for the Australian Labour Party conference, which is cancelled, just to be sort of hanging around. My name is Russell Rook. I am from London. A bit about me. I grew up in the Salvation Army. I was a fetal salvationist, so I was a salvo before I had any choice in the matter. And I worked for the Salvation Army for the first 18 years. Couldn't really call it work. David Eldridge worked with me for a period, and nothing that we did together was ever classified really as work. But they did pay us for it, which was remarkable. I worked for the Salvation Army as a youth evangelist and as a youth worker, and helping to run their mission department, and then doing a few other things. And then about 18 years ago in the autumn, I moved on, and for about 7 years, I myself and some friends, we'll talk about this a bit later, we started a charity which ran, started 7 new schools in the United Kingdom, which were government funded but Christian faith-based schools, and so we did that. And then somewhere in the process of that, I managed to find myself moving into politics, and so the last sort of 4 or 5 years of my life has been spent doing a certain amount of politics. And so my life is sort of slightly messy, which is why I hate it when people ask me what I do, because I find it really difficult to explain. So I spend 3 days of my week, most weeks, working for the Good Faith Partnership, which is a social consultancy which brings leaders from different sectors together to try and find innovative solutions to society's most intractable problems, which sounds very flash, but essentially I spend most of my good faith time working on 3 projects. I chair a group called Reset, which is a government-funded charity helping communities in the United Kingdom to welcome more refugees through refugee sponsorship. We will talk a bit about that. I oversee a project in the Houses of Parliament called RAMP, which stands for Resettlement, Asylum, Migration Policy Project, which is seeking to direct the immigration debate in the United Kingdom as we negotiate a wonderful thing called Brexit. And then the third thing that I do is my third thing I do for the Good Faith Partnership is I work for a guy who possibly has the greatest title in the world. Those of you in the Salvation Army who think we do titles well, you should see my boss in this particular area of life. His full title is His Most Godly Beatitude, Theophilus III, Patriarch of the Church of Jerusalem. And he's the 4th most highly ranked patriarch in the Greek Orthodox work. He is the recognised leader of the Christian community in Jerusalem by the Knesset, the State of Israel, by the Palestinian Authority, and by the King of Jordan. And his job is to lead the Christian community in Israel, and he's essentially a monk. He went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to school when he was 12 years old. He's from Athens originally, and he went to that school at 12 years old, decided to become a monk, and is now responsible for the church in the Holy Land. And he doesn't like politics. He wants to be a monk. He wants to do the things that monks do. And so it's very difficult to lead the church in the Holy Land without doing politics. And so essentially our little organisation helps to do his politics in the United Kingdom and the United States. And then when I'm not doing that, I spend most of my time in Parliament. I work for the Shadow Welfare Secretary, the Shadow Minister for Welfare in the House of Lords, whose full title now is the Reverend Baroness Sherlock of Durham, OBE. I will call her Maeve from now on, because that's a lot easier. And so I work for Maeve in the Lords, and I spend time mentoring some politicians and supporting politicians, and just generally trying to do things that don't get me into too much trouble. And so for us, what we've been trying to say is that actually, as Christians think about what it means to deliver social action in your communities, don't just think about the evils that you are there to eradicate. And it might be that your job is to challenge others to eradicate those evils because they might be better equipped to do it than you are. But think about the assets that you want to invest in and the goods you want to bring and the way you want to allow relationships, creativity, partnership, compassion, and joy to flourish. You've got 30 seconds to share with one another, and I'm going to try and very quickly take you through our last bit of this presentation. Go. And the last thing we try and do in the book is to help churches and those involved in Christian social action to think about where they position themselves. So one of the challenges you've got if you're a church, and I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but if you're in the UK right now, one of the challenges you've got is, one, there's just so much different stuff you can do. So we've gone from being not really involved in social action to suddenly churches feel like they've got to do everything. And the question is, what do we do? And how do we do what we do faithfully and intelligently? And so you have church leaders now under so much pressure to deliver so much, they just don't have the capacity. And then there's the question of, actually, theologically, what should I do and what shouldn't I do? And what is compromising our faith and what is actually actualising our faith? And so Sam, for instance, Sam said to me, in his first parish, he was a vicar in Norwich, in a government housing area, housing estate as we call it. And the government came along and said, we want to put a whole load of money into regenerating communities. We don't do that anymore because we don't have any money left. But back in the day, we used to do regeneration projects. And Sam remembers saying, there's nothing in theological college taught me, and nothing when I was being trained up to be a vicar told me about what contract I should apply for, and whether I should take this piece of government money, or whether I should provide that service, or whether I should run the children's centre or take over the local school. And so his whole challenge was, what do I do at this point? And so this last part of the book was kind of written to help those people who are engaged in Christian social action to think about what they do and what they don't do. And what we've created is this, what we call the social action spectrum. I'll try and go over it very, very quickly. And it basically says there are 5 different positions that churches or Christian organisations can take in trying to live out their social action in the world, from contradiction through to co-option. And as you'll see at the end, we are not really saying that any one of these positions is better or worse than another. There is probably one that we don't like very much. But actually, in most cases, all of them are really, really valid. And actually what we were trying to do is say, look, it's just really important to know what you're trying to do and to be confident about that and to try and achieve it effectively. So, here we go. The first one is contradiction. That's the first position on the spectrum. And this is the classic kind of campaigning scenario. This is where actually you are really challenging someone else to deal with a deficit. You're saying, actually, this isn't right. It's not right that in our country, a million people will need a food bank this year when you're the 5th richest country in the world. The government should do something about this. And some churches might want to say, actually, if we keep helping. So the food bank situation in the UK has been quite controversial, because some people say that by churches providing a food bank, it lets the government off the hook, that it is their statutory obligation to make sure people don't go to bed hungry. Yeah? So there's a controversy in the United Kingdom about whether churches should do that, and whether they should actually be, rather than providing food banks to let the government off the hook, they should be campaigning to make sure that actually the government does what it's meant to do. And so contradiction is where a Christian position is to say, actually, we need to contradict the policy or the decision or the plan or the programme that's in place at the moment. We need to say that something else needs to take place. So one example of that would be my colleague David Barclay, who wrote the book. He was the leader of a campaign called the War on Wonga. Okay? Wonga is a payday lender in the United Kingdom that was lending sums of money to people who could not get access to fair credit, usually around an approved rate of interest of 1,400%. So it's basically a legalised loan shark, and people would be obviously indebted to these companies for years and years and years. They would never pay these debts off, and they were truly horrific. And actually there's very little that churches could do to just kind of stop that happening. And so my colleague David Barclay, along with the help of the Archbishop of Canterbury, coordinated a campaign called the War on Wonga to say actually the government needed to take action, and it needed to stop allowing these loans to be made to people at these ridiculous rates of interest. And sure enough, the campaign was successful. And it looked at how we should promote credit unions and other providers. And actually the Good Faith Project, we've just done a new project to look at how we create fairer lending markets for people who don't have access to fair debt, who is financially... We have about 8 million people in the UK out of 60 million who don't have a bank account. So they struggle to manage finance, and so they end up taking money from groups like this, or even worse, from loan sharks. And so we've gone on to say, well, actually, we're not just going to campaign against it, we're going to try and come up with creative solutions for these people. So the second position is contrast. So the first one is contradiction. Contrast is where, rather than saying, well, actually, we know that the state is meant to do certain things, and actually we as Christians, or we as a church, or we as an NGO are going to do something different. We're going to be deliberately different in offering something that doesn't exist at the moment. So all of our positions aren't about saying actually it's all about how churches work with or alongside the state in some way, shape or form. Whether you're campaigning for better policies or whether you're saying the state doesn't do something, so we're going to offer a service which contrasts to that which the state uses. So an example of contrast would be Christians Against Poverty. So we have a very large network, I mentioned it earlier, of debt advice in the UK. There's a few different organisations, but CAP is the biggest organisation. And they set up to say, look, we recognise that those people who do get into massive trouble with loans and debts and are just massively indebted, we recognise that there's actually no way that the state provides for people to get out of that. And so what we're going to do is put debt advisors into churches. And what would happen is, so for instance, in my previous job, we ran, amongst other things, a health centre. And I remember we had a woman come in and who clearly had lots of health problems, but the biggest mental health problem was massive debt. So we sent Christians Against Poverty round, so they would call on a house and they'd make an appointment, they'd call the house, and then the plan is they sit them down and say, look, just tell us honestly what the situation is. And I remember this woman said to the male debt advisor, oh, come up to my bedroom, which he wasn't expecting, and he obviously wasn't that comfortable. She said, no, I need to show you something. So he sort of, with some trepidation, went up to her bedroom, and she said, could you help me with the mattress, please? So it's getting stranger and stranger, and this woman with the debt advisor lifts up the mattress, and basically she put every bill or every red letter that had come into her house under the bed for years and years and years. And literally this mattress was sitting on a pile of different letters saying that bailiffs were coming around, that she was being taken to court, that she owed this, that the interest was there. And immediately what Christians Against Poverty would do is they would actually take every single one of those. He had to take all of those letters back to the office with him. And then he had to come up with a plan to speak to those creditors to make it possible that they could come up with some kind of plan that she could at least repay part of the money, which is great for the creditors because they've given up on this money by now. So the fact that they're going to get something back is really helpful. And then the debt advisor obviously works with the person in the house to say, right, okay, we've got a plan and we can help. We've made a deal. You're not going to have to pay back all of it, but you're going to pay back this amount and it needs to be this month, and we're going to help you run your finances so that you can actually not only start to pay off some of these debts, but also get your own life in order. So that's not a service that the state offers or probably could offer, but that Christian organisation can. And I always laugh because on very secular British media, if ever there's we're very nervous about promoting Christian projects. If there's ever an item on debt, you can guarantee at the end, whoever's doing it will say the best single thing you can do if you're in trouble with debt is speak to Christians Against Poverty. So that's a contrasting service. Third is a complementary service. So that's a service where Christians say, well, actually, we recognise the state does this, but that's probably not enough. It's only just dealing with the deficit, and we want to do something more. So we're going to put something that's complementary in place, and our project's going to help to do something extra. So an example of that would be in the UK, for instance, we have a programme called SPEAR. It again came out of a church, an Anglican church in Hammersmith called St Paul's. And essentially, we have less of a problem now than when SPEAR started, probably partly thanks to SPEAR. But about in sort of 2010 to 2015, we had historically high numbers of young adult unemployment in the United Kingdom, massively high. And what SPEAR did, create a really simple program where basically they have employment coaches, and their employment coaches go to job centres, which are the centres that are created in the United Kingdom whereby you have to go and say, I'm looking for work, and that means you can claim a benefit, and the job centre is meant to help you to get into work. We're not going to go into whether that works or not, but that's what the state does to help people who are unemployed into employment. And they recognised that the young adults just weren't getting any support or any help. They were going and signing, but actually there was no chance of them ever finding a job. So they created a scheme where their coaches go into the job centres and basically pick up 18 to 25-year-old young people and say, you know what, why don't you come on our coaching course? And there's a 6-week coaching course, and there's a work experience piece at the end. And they actually get about 80% of the young people they work with into sustainable employment within the time of their programme. So it's a programme that works alongside the state, it complements the state, it does stuff that the state could never do, and it has an impact that actually the state never has. So that's complementary. And the last one, well, for now, this will go co-option in a minute, is collaboration. And that's where a Christian organisation goes a step further and says, actually, we're actually going to work with the state on a project. So, as I said to you earlier, I started a charity which put 7 new schools into disadvantaged communities. Now, those are state-funded schools. So the state funds you, that means you have to do the things that the state asks you to do, and you have to know that in advance and say that you're happy with that. But we also believe that this was a really unique way of a Christian organisation and a local church changing a local community. So we, for instance, we started a school in Oxford. When we started the school in Oxford obviously has Oxford University, which means it has 5% of the brains of the Western world living there, and had the worst primary schools in the United Kingdom. And there was one particular area which was really adversely affected, and we thought, actually, well, what the church wants to do, we worked with the local church, is put a really good school in that place for those parents in that community that would be have a really strong Christian ethos, but would also provide excellent education. So it's classic collaboration. So you're working with the state to deliver something that the state wants delivered, and it does it with you. And that means that there's some limitations, what you can and can't do, but at the same time you do have an opportunity, and you have funding, and you have resource, and you can make a difference in people's lives, and hopefully add some really good things into their community. And lastly, and I was about to say lastly, and by no means least, sorry, our charity was called Chapel Street, we come to co-option. This is the one that we think that of those first 4, I can point, as I have done, to all kinds of different programmes which are entirely valid, that occupy one of those positions on the spectrum, and it's a good place to be. Co-option is the one that we're slightly nervous of, because this is where a Christian project or a church-run project basically just delivers what the state delivers. And it becomes basically an arm for the state, and kind of loses its its sort of difference and its distinguishing marks, and becomes something that just delivers what the state wants. I can think of a few examples in the world where that's a good thing. I can think of a few. I can't think of many in the United Kingdom, I have to say. So one where I could think of as a good thing is in the development world, in contexts where sometimes cultural views around gender and sexuality mean that people find a huge stigma in people who have HIV and AIDS, and where it's really difficult to get communities to take antiretroviral drugs in the right way and use them in the right way. There are numerous instances where actually if you allow churches or faith-based organisations to deliver the antiretrovirals, they get delivered in a way that people use them well, and it has a bigger impact than actually if you have a local healthcare deliverer doing it, or a local just kind of aid and relief agency doing it. And that seems to me a good thing. If churches can do that, that's absolutely great. But at that point, the church has basically become the deliverer of healthcare for the state. So we are slightly nervous about co-option, where the church or a Christian organisation just becomes an arm of the state, but it is part of our spectrum.
What was the worst thing about being in the boys' home? And my mother would have said, taught him to eat too fast, because you didn't get seconds if you didn't get through the first quickly. But he said the worst thing was listening to the little kids cry themselves to sleep at night. Still sticks with me, that one. What made us think as a community that we could live children in dormitory care? As young as 6 in many cases, younger in some institutions. And after that, when the Salvation Army and other churches shrank their institution into cottages and other arrangements, it just meant, certainly in Victoria, that the department institutions blew out. So you had significant numbers of kids living in Orlando, which is a department-run dormitory-style institution, because the churches downsized so much that there were not enough beds for the kids who were coming into care across the state. So large under-resourced institutions was a problem for us and for everybody. I think another issue that struck me is that offenders in the Salvation Army and elsewhere in the church networks, they hid behind a veil of piety. You know, it couldn't conceivably be Major so-and-so because he's been in office for 20 years, or it couldn't be so-and-so because Brother Smith goes to Adelaide Congress Hall and he's been there for 20 years, you know. They couldn't conceivably be abusing young people. I'm talking sexual abuse because, let's be honest, physical abuse was accepted, especially in the boys' homes. And we need to understand that in the Salvation Army context, boys' homes were worse than girls' homes. There were not not that I'm aware of, many complaints about the girls' homes. And that's partly because of the way they were set up. They were set up largely they developed initially under Cornelia Booth, Herbert Booth's wife, who showed a real interest in working girls' homes and, make sure the clothing was better and they were a more homely environment. Boys' homes came out of that sort of muscular Christianity ethos of, you've got to make men out of them. Well, fortunately, my parents didn't decide to make a man out of me at 6 or 7. And they were fairly unsuccessful in 18 and 19. The whole ethos of the boys' homes was different. There was much more physical punishment, as there was at school. I mean, I grew up in Queensland when the cane and the strap were quite used in primary and secondary school.
Yes.
I memory of holding my hand out and the principal saying to keep your hands still. I'm thinking, boy, you're a hippie. That was quite common, but it was common in institutions and it got out of control. Another thing in Salvation Army institutions was that for many officers, they went into training college to be corps officers, and the bright ones became corps officers, and the ones who weren't so bright by the college's recommendation became social officers. So there was a sense that social officership was a second-rate calling. And that wasn't really rectified, I don't think, till about Eva Burrows' time when she was Commissioner in the Southern Territory, where she purposely went through a year of cadets and selected a number of the brighter cadets to go into social appointments. It was a place where we put people who weren't well trained and weren't well prepared for the tasks that they had. The other thing is, not just the Salvation Army, but hardly anybody had trained professionals in the children's homes in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Welfare Institute training in Victoria started in the 70s, I think, late 60s, early 70s. There weren't trained people, there wasn't scrutiny. The screening of staff, we employed people because we knew them or because they went to this corps or they were good Baptists or something like that. Maybe not good Lutherans because you drank. And we wouldn't know what you get up to when you've had a few beers. So it was an arbitrary way of employing staff, and it didn't really work for us. I think the leadership essentially of the organisation in the Salvation Army and in Catholics and probably in other churches was drawn from the ecclesiastical arm, and very few senior leaders in the Salvation Army had any social experience. So they weren't in a position to scrutinise even reports coming in on the home. The department did reports on the homes. They weren't particularly heavily scrutinised, and if some negative comments were made, they were veiled comments that a social work person would read and say, oh, well, don't like that. But an ecclesiastical bureaucrat would read and not see, and would scan through. So I think that was the challenge. And certainly in the Salvation Army, as in other places, when an officer or a person who committed an offence was identified, they were moved. We wanted to protect the good name of the institution, and it hasn't worked out well for us, has it? So, and it generally doesn't, if that's your basis. But my largest one, my most significant issue, I think, is that we didn't listen to children. They often went to somebody to complain, and generally it was a lower placed staff member in the organisation who wasn't listened to. So we weren't attuned to the needs or to the cries of the young people who we were caring for. And for me, that's a salutary lesson for today as well. We need to develop ways of listening to people who use our services in a way that we will be more responsive to their needs and not to our own. That's a challenge, I think, for anybody running a program in the church or anything, that we have listening ears to people's cries. As a result, the Royal Commission of Salvation Army have issued an apology. There are new child protection measures in the organisation with stringent screening of staff and volunteers. I can't think, nearly all of our social work programs are staffed by professionals these days. There are smaller units, if they're residential, aren't they? They're much smaller units. So staff can watch each other, to be honest. I managed residential care for homeless young people for about 15 years, and Sometimes kids would raise an inappropriate action from the staff, you know, and it wasn't. It was generally the what I would call grooming, rather than other things, or other staff raised it. There's an internal culture within a good program that disciplines staff and keeps the boundaries black, safe and strong. But we are much better at that. I think we still need to address a couple of things. I think we need to be better at listening to clients still, for people who use our services. And we need to build in more appropriate complaints models. If you build a complaints procedure in a social program, I want to hear a lot of complaints. Because if people aren't complaining, it's not a good model. People naturally complain. I think there is a danger in churches where the leader of the parish or the church is still a very powerful person and can make a decision what proceeds and what doesn't proceed, and will sometimes circumvent process because they don't think it's serious enough. What we've learned since the Royal Commission is the incredible impact of abuse on young people, families, communities. But I just thought I'd put through quickly thought through ways forward for faith-based agencies in Australia. Firstly, as I said, I think we do need to hear the voice of service users. In the designing and delivery of programs, and service users are a very general term, I mean people in the community. If you're working, in a place-based sort of organisation, how are you engaging, how are you listening to what communities want, how are you designing and delivering programs in a way that meet genuine needs. I'm a great believer. I did a task force for the Commonwealth. Yes, it was from Mr. Howard, but he's still not my favourite politician. I lost a bit of interest around the time of the Tanker story. But in this task force, we looked at young people's transitions through school and beyond, and wrote a report. We talked a lot in the report about opportunity-rich pathways. I think we've focused so much on case management as a tool. We've lost a bit of our skill on community development professionally across Australia. Governments don't fund it, it's all too awkward and too hard to capture. We obsess around case management as though it's going to solve everybody's problems. Now, there are good case management models and bad case management models, but it's not the only answer. I think we need to have a lot more energy focused on building opportunity-rich pathways in local communities that are built on strong partnerships across community agencies, schools, government departments, local community members, sporting groups. There just needs to be a new vision of what local community and neighbourhood means in Australia, and we've lost some of it, and I think we are part of, churches in particular, of rebuilding the social capital in our local communities and in our neighbourhoods. And that can only be rebuilt around giving people opportunities to learn, to grow, to develop, to participate, and I find that the exciting thing to do. I think the other thing is we need to build sustainable networks of care with multiple funding sources. Russ talked about multiple funding sources. I think that's becoming more and more important, but it is challenging. The Salvation Army has relied on op shops or charity shops to be one of our sustainable independent funding sources. I think we need to find more creative ways. Cafes, a lot of people do, very rarely make money. Great social ventures, but they're not great money makers. But there must be some things that will provide people with work, learning opportunities, and produce some income. And I just think we've got to be really creative about it. So think outside the box, and you'll find ideas in your local business community, and don't feel bad about partnering with them. They're not all evil. So I think, it is about a different approach within churches, generous love rather than professional routines. So that's probably the thing I'd like to finish on. But, it's just an outburst of compassionate care would be lovely across the churches across the country.
Yeah, language is very important. We at Vinnie's have asked the people we assist, what do you want to be called? We say people. Because often we have, we have seen how they became their clients, and then say consumers, and then participants, and then partners. At the end of the day, they are people. So that language is really important. And I'm not about to summarize what I've heard, but one key thing seems to be relationship. Relationship with the people we assist, how we actually see them as partners in their own journey, how we help them to discover the assets, the strengths that they already have, and how we can strengthen that, and how we can consolidate that, and how we can improve that. We are not bringing them something. We are facilitating the discovery of their own strengths. So, relationship with the people we assist, relationship within our organizations. Many of our organizations have multiple services, and consciously or unconsciously we can be siloed within our own organizations because we're too busy, because we're so focused on what we're doing. But how we can collaborate within our own organizations, relationship within our own organizations. And part of that relationship is caring for each other within our own organizations. Relationship with other government and non-government organizations. I think Helen said, here in the North, we're quite good in terms of inter-organizational, inter-institutional organizations on the base grade level. Because we know that we need each other. It's when we go into middle management and higher management that their competition consciously or unconsciously can set in. And government, consciously or unconsciously, is actually also very good in dividing and conquer. Right? So we get contradictory messages. Collaborate, but compete. Right? And we do not know how to live that, and it becomes then a weakness on our part and a strength on the part of the organization or of the government. And lastly, relationship with our government people, with our politicians, but also the bureaucrats within the organizations that they work for. They're actually also human beings, believe it or not, right? And as David says, they too are aware of what's happening. As you know, much more than I do, each minister has staff members whose only task is to write ministerials, right? Because once they get a letter, it has to be answered within the first 3 days. Right? So they know and they listen. So relationship. The courage to be partners, I think one group said that in that relationship with governments, that we don't come across as beggars, but we come across as partners. Right? And the courage to be that, to actually speak, not for our organizations only, but speak for the people we assist to the extent that they cannot yet speak for themselves. The one important relationship is, as Greg said, trust in God. Right? At the end of the day, we hope and we believe that we are doing God's work. It's God's work. Yeah. Salvation and liberation is God's work. Our task is to make that, I think was talked about incarnational theology. Our task is to incarnate that. But that has already happened in Jesus. So that relationship with God, for those of us, with Jesus Christ, for those of us who believe that, and we know that that is a relationship that has to be lived out in a multi-faith society and in a multi-faith composition of our organizations. But on the one hand, we have choices. We can be silent about it, and that seems to be the common theme nowadays. Just water it down a little bit so that everybody would feel included. Or we can be quote unquote very evangelistic about it. But the truth is somewhere in between. We can live it, we have to live it. What is truly meaningful and important to us, and by our works we will be known, rather than by our words.
I've been in a position where I've had people help me, so that's why I've come around to try and help people, pay it forward.
It's definitely turned my life around, and for the better. So, and the positive effect that this place has had on me, I'm able to give that a positive effect to other people around me. It's like a ripple effect.
Here it's actually given them guidance, it's given them self-worth. Some people just didn't want to get out of bed in the morning, and now they've got a place to come, so they want to get up every day and come here. So yeah, that's where I see it's made an improvement in the area, because instead of people sitting at home alone, they've got somewhere to come and sit and chat, and they don't have to do much to be here. Just be here is the best part about it. They've gained friends, they've gained knowledge, and they've actually gained trust and self-worth in themselves.
When I started, I had someone mentoring me to go through my work, and from there I just learned from her, and after that I get confident myself and work myself. We've been having Friday garden, because we have garden, and the people been coming different culture, and we mix with everyone, and everyone feel like comfortable.
I was in a very bad place before coming here, and things were. I was pretty well on a downhill spiral. Didn't leave the house very much, and then I sort of lost the social skills, you could say, to be around people. So I'm learning all these extra skills that I can now pass on or use in the future. So I didn't think I ever had a future. If you'd talked to me 6 months ago, I wouldn't be in this position. I would probably still be inside, not talking to anyone, and just continuing down that spiral. But yeah, I'm really glad that I've found this place. It's definitely the best thing that's happened to me. It's really turned my outlook on life around.
Some of the groups that we run, like the Parenting Together group, the aim of that is to get the parents working together from the same page. So when there's an issue with the family at home, mum and dad are going to act in the same way and think the same way and support each other and support the family, support the child. And that strengthens the family because that creates consistency. It gives the child a secure attachment because they know that they're going to get a consistent response from the parents.
And that's one of the things that family support hubs do, is that they provide that kind of environment where the whole community can get around a family and, together with professional support, help people to move past some of the crises that they have. And that's one of the ways in which we as a community can take responsibility. It's not just the government's problem, it's not just organisations' problem, it's not just individual families' responsibility, it's all of us together being able to make a difference.
Postnatal depression for me was awful. Like, there wasn't even a feeling of happiness or sadness because I was so low. I was actually numb. But knowing that there was a place that I could actually come to between 9 and 5, that I didn't have to worry about anything. I didn't have to have money in my wallet. Just get in the door, and I knew when I got in the door things would change significantly. So I've grown up with family, but everyone's passed away, and I grew up with a sense of community and family, which my children now don't have. So this is more their lounge room that I can provide them that I otherwise can't give them.
Peachy Place actually gives people somewhere to come where they can tell their life story and not be judged.
Before they were desperately lonely, but when they started to come here and talk to people, they feel like they have a life.
Yeah, everybody's like one big family, happy family here. Being a part of this family has actually taught me how to reconnect with my own family.
If I could choose to be anywhere else, I could choose to be at Peachy Place. So that's how I feel like it's my home.
And that's something that we see here on a daily basis at the Family Hub Zone is families supporting each other, individuals supporting each other, children supporting each other.
Without something like this, I don't know how my children would have a sense of community or family outreach. It's vital to their understanding for their future, really.
So there's a prequel and a sequel to this video which was made a couple of years ago, and the prequel is that Bradley from Peachy Place really didn't want to be on video. He felt he was too embarrassed, about how he looked. And we said, no, it's fine, you don't need to be on it, we can do things differently. After a while, when we'd been filming for a little while, he came over to me and he said, I've been helped so much, I do want to talk more. So we made it so that he just had to talk to me, he could just talk to me, and he didn't feel like he was being filmed. The really sad sequel is that about 6 months after this, Rodney, the person that was mentoring Bradley, died suddenly in his sleep. Now Rodney had come to us as a dad whose wife had just died, who was bringing up 2 kids on his own, ex-military, he had lots of issues, and he just felt really lonely and finding it really difficult to bring up his kids. And he found a home at Peachy Place, but it didn't stay there. He passed on that to Rodney, and as he started to recover, he supported Bradley more and more. And of course, with the death, and for the whole community there, such a sudden death, and the need to spend a lot of time working with people and supporting people and thinking about how these girls were going to now be brought up. Fortunately, the grandparents were living with them, and there was a bit of a transition for them. But I thought, well, this will be it for Bradley. You know, he's had so much loss in his life, and what's going to happen now to him in that community. And as you go back there now, there's Bradley mentoring someone else and saying, I thought I would fall in a hole, but Rodney was with me during my hard times, and now I need to be here for other people. And that community and that garden has been such a healing place for people to come, to be able to be there, many people with many problems. And what's happening now, of course, is that those people are actually connecting at other times, on weekends and so on. They've formed a whole community of people that know who they can call if they are in trouble. So that community garden out there was formed as a partnership with Playford Council and with Housing SA and the Roonian Association. Lutheran Community Care's had to pick up a fair bit of it, and we don't have funding for that place. So we're constantly having to find ways of keeping it going, because there's no way we're going to let that go, that is making such a difference in people's lives. And of course, up on that way, isn't it? With the Family Hub Zone, similar thing happening with government funding, saying suddenly you can't have the hub function as part of what you're funded for, and having to juggle things to make it work. And I guess one of the most important things about being an executive director and senior management in these organisations is to be able to juggle without anybody on the ground knowing that you're juggling. That for the person who comes to you, that it's seamless support, care, love, and at the same time you're all paddling pretty hard back at the office to make it all work. But it only happens because people, again, have those assets already. You know, it's a matter of being able to work with people in order to bring that out and to connect people and make them feel that they're comfortable. It's a big topic to think about, and it's a thing that's cutting edge for us every day, really, isn't it? About where do we compromise, where don't we compromise, where the things that we believe in, that we believe that communities need to be strong, and how do we build that strength? How do we build people up so that we're not just doing the handout bit, we are actually working alongside people and getting them to the point where they can support each other to be the Bradleys of this world, letting that love pass on to the next person.